We're all here for this meetup. What is it about, you may ask? Well, it's about many things, but we're talking about the Latinx diaspora today. Latinx, Latine, Latino, Latina, Hispanic, Chicano, Afro-Latina, Black Latina, Boricua, Garifuna, Mestizaje. These are only a few labels of the many that encompass an entire diaspora. So today's meetup hopes to talk further about intersections such as these and claiming who we are. I personally am particularly excited for this meetup today because as a mixed Latina myself, I know I personally have found it very difficult sometimes finding the right label for my identity or even one that I feel like best represents me. Plus, I know sometimes that conversations about where you come from are not always welcome in family settings, and they haven't necessarily been welcome in mine either. So here we are in a space to have those open conversations and continue exploring identity in a safe way. We have two amazing speakers joining us here today to share their perspectives on identity and their journey. And I want to add that what I bring to the conversation, what Lucy brings and what Natalia brings are our personal experiences of what our identity journey has looked like, shown, and taught us. You know, we are not here today to speak for an entire diaspora, but from our own perspectives, and invite each and every one of you to also share about what your journey and identity has looked like, what you resonate with in our stories, and even what you're still frustrated with. Each month, the Mixed Space collects and doubles donations for a particular organization, and today we are fundraising for the Lose Writers Room, which is a high quality digital platform where writers are paid for their valuable work and unique perspectives. This collective is aimed at uplifting Latinas and BIPOC writers, so we have dropped the donation PayPal into the chat if you're interested in donating. That is what we do. So as I mentioned, we have two amazing speakers here today joining us from the Lose Collective. We have Lucy and Natalia. So I'm gonna hand it over to Lucy to give a quick, brief intro of who she is. Thank you, Lucy, for being here. Please tell us about yourself.
Thanks so much for the invitation. So first off, I'm so excited about this conversation. This conversation is literally one of the main reasons why I founded the Lose Collective. As a Latina born in the US to Mexican parents, grew up speaking Spanish first, learning English later. So hola todo el mundo. You know, this question and this conversation of identity is one that we have not really been able to have. And the primary reason for that is because media really controls our narrative, and it builds that narrative out, and therefore in many ways defines who we are for us, as opposed to us being able to define ourselves. And as Latinas and Latinos in the United States and Latinx and Hispanic, you know, all those words that you just mentioned, there's so little discussion about what it all means to us, not personally, but then also generally speaking as a group, right? And so we have so many similarities and so many things that define us, but then so many things that make us unique. And that conversation just doesn't get to happen very often. So I founded the Lose Collective almost 3 years ago as a way to tell our stories, to center our stories, to be able to have these conversations in the public space, in the public narrative, and to really ensure that we're able to, again, lead our narratives in an authentic and culturally competent way, because that is, frankly, the only way in which we can truly begin to define ourselves and who we are as people. So that being said, that's a little bit about the Lose Collective. Me, my background is in politics. I was the first Latina ever elected to the state legislature in the history of Nevada back in 2010. I was in politics for almost a decade until I moved over into digital media. And frankly, I'm as committed now to what I was, which was ensuring that, again, we have representation, that our stories are being told, and that our faces and who we are front and center in those narratives. And Natalia is also with Lose Collective, and she's going to get a chance to introduce herself as well. But I'm just so incredibly excited to not only be able to work with so many talented Latinas, Latinos, people, but like I said, be a part of this so critically important conversation.
Hi, everyone. I'm a content creator. I'm 13, and I've been able to work with organizations that work with environmental issues, women issues, and I'm finally here with Lucy. I came across her thanks to my job, so I'm able to speak about my identity, about our truths, about our skin, of our color, our identity, our culture, and everything. And we're so proud to be, talking with you all and sharing what we've been through and what are we doing right now and how we want to change the world. We all know that most of the times our voices are not heard, are not even looked at. So having this space to actually like share with people what we are living is such a great opportunity.
Thank you so much. Yes, so as you can tell, we have two amazing speakers here today, and I do just want to, as more people are joining us, I just want to echo a statement that I said, which is that the three of us can only speak from our perspectives, and this is about everyone sort of joining in the conversation about what their identity journeys look like, frustrations, or even similarities that they see to our stories. So please be dropping in the chat anything that you'd like to add. You would like even the floor to share your perspective and your story. We welcome that. We openly invite that. And as I did mention before, and I'm just going to mention it again, just to clarify, we all only speak from our own perspective. So thank you so much for being here. Lucy, Natalia, I've had an honor and a chance to have conversations with these women previously to this meetup. And something that we did touch on in our initial conversation that I'd love to just start off with right from the get-go is Lucy had brought up this really great point that according to science, we are considered white sometimes. Latinas and people who are Hispanic are considered white, and yet I will say that, when if I'm half Polish, if someone were to ask me, what are you? And I say Polish, I mean, that's never, right? People are like, okay, yes, but and what? Like there's Latin in there. So we're seen as not white, and yet science says we are white. And so like, let's even start there, because that's mind-boggling. Because is it a race? Is it an ethnicity? How do you check it off on a census? What is that? So let's start there.
Well, in terms of what I know and what I've learned about, the racial, the ethnicity portion of it, right? There's only a couple. And then you go down beyond that. And at the end of the day, all of our DNA is exactly the same, right? And so then it's like we're all human. But the thing is that specifically here in the United States, but really everywhere, but it's more so a problem for Latinos here in the United States because of the way in which the census wants to, have everyone categorized. And, for good purpose, right? Like there's lots of research and there's all kinds of good reason to have a census that dials down into race, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, et cetera. So I'm certainly not saying it's a bad thing. That being said, because Latino in and of itself is a construct, right? We start to talk about the social construct of what it means to be Latino. And then who defines that construct? Who makes it, right? Latino at the end of the day can be the spectrum of races, right? There's Black Latinos, there's Afro-Latinos, which I've only recently learned. And again, I speak from not having a Black identity experience, but I've learned from my Black friends, like for example, that you can be half Black, half Latino, and that's very different identity correlation to than being Afro-Latino, which generally refers to Caribbean roots. So, I think that the conversation oftentimes then turns into how can we actually talk about this without first kind of having a knee-jerk reaction, especially when white presenting Latinos don't identify as white. Because I certainly understand the trepidation and also the frustration, because we do have so much anti-Blackness within the Latino community, which is a thing, right? Like we have so much anti-Blackness, we have anti-Indigenous roots. I mean, there's a lot of frankly mixing that occurred within the colonization process of the Indigenous people of Latin America. that coming out at the other end in terms of trying to define who you are is often such a difficult conversation to have, that when people then don't identify that they have white privilege, when they don't accept that they have white privilege, that in and of itself is a problem. That comes from anti-Blackness. So, I think that, we're not obviously going to have any answers to your question, Ariel, or even, we're almost like skimming the surface of this conversation. But I think it's just something that's so critically important to one define as far as, okay, what is race? But then also get beyond that, because I am considered white according to, the science behind it. But I in no way ever identify as white. And I certainly don't present as white, I would say most of the time. Maybe on occasion I can pass as white, and I certainly benefit from some lighter color privilege, right? And I fully accept that. But me personally speaking, never in a million years will I ever say that I am white. I'm just not. And even though I know in, what the scholarly papers say that I am, even though I know that and I acknowledge it, I will not check a white box ever. And I never have on the census. I always end up checking other, or, Hispanic, because of course they still categorize us as Hispanic. And then, moving on from there. But it is a difficult conversation. I'll stop there. Natalia, of course, has her experience as someone who doesn't present as white as well. But which is the case across, Latin America. But I'm just, it's just such a fascinating conversation for us to be having right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think part of the issue too is there's people that don't live like us, who are tagging us, who are putting us in boxes. They don't even know what we live, what has happened in our history, and are trying to fit us in different boxes. So when people that are not part of our community try to understand us and don't even listen to us, end up putting like labels like Hispanic, like you mentioned. And you were saying there's Afro-Latina. That doesn't mean exactly like, being Black and Latina, but you still have this heritage that is, we are a mix of stuff. And recognizing each identity, each heritage allows you to go back to everything that you went through. I myself represent as an Afro-Latina. I identify as an Afro-Latina because of my long years of discovery and reading and whatnot. And I've come to understand that race is lived differently for each one of us. Latinos that are more brownish can look like Black, or that there are Latinos that can look like white, but they still speak Spanish, so they will still get harassment, but they are not, like if they come back to their country, they will not be as harassed because they're white, as in. And me, I will be pointed out everywhere in the whole world. They know I'm not white passing. I have curly hair that really draws attention. I have a skin color that is kind of dark. So recognizing that each of our own experiences will be different, it's important to know that not everyone will go through the same thing. And we have to empathize with the people that suffer more than us, but we also have to recognize that we suffer from discrimination, whatever racist slurs they might be. So it's complicated, and it's a good conversation to have between our own community, because there's a lot of people that don't even know Afro-Latina exists. They don't even know they deny history from Indigenous past. And it's important to recognize that each of our own ancestors has a tiny bit of different races, like Spanish, we have French, whatever, we have Indigenous and Indigenous that, because Indigenous is just one category, because there's Mapuche and whatnot. So as we grow, as we learn, we have to be gentle with ourselves and be in having these conversations and be open-minded, and also be open to criticism and people telling us to our face, like, this was not okay from you, this was not this is you're taking advantage of whatever, of this population, of this white presenting thing. But we have to talk about it, and it's hard, but we need to do it.
Snaps to that. And I also just want to say that this chat is blowing up, and I love it. All of the everyone relating and everyone sharing knowledge is amazing. And just Natalia, you mentioned like giving ourselves grace, and you know, I totally agree with that. And I think that these conversations are important to have, because as someone who is Mexican, it was only through conversation with another Latinx person that is just like kind of a nationality and not even a race in and of itself. So like, let's go back and dig deeper and say like, okay, who was there first? Who colonized Mexico? What is your actual, like, what is your actual race, not ethnicity? And I want to talk about right now, just really quickly, all of the different labels that have come up. So we have like, I mean, all the ones that I read in that opening statement, and perhaps the speakers here can shed light on some that they've heard, or everyone in the chat, you can drop labels that you've heard or that people have tried to put you into as well. Because I think for me, that's been really detrimental as well, just because people have said, oh, you're Hispanic, like that's what you are, go off and do this. Especially for schools, right? Like you want a certain demographic of Hispanic people, so it all gets clumped in together. But I found that, you know, even trying to change the language from, well, am I Mexican or is it mestizaje? Like, what actually is it, has started to change the way that I've thought of my identity and myself, and the way that I approach family with these conversations. So I'm wondering if our speakers or even anyone here has had that sort of label fight, if anyone has given them a label, you've been like, whoa, just let's talk about labels.
Yeah, there's actually a question about how do we handle pushback on Latinx, because there is a lot of pushback. And as a digital publisher, we decided a while ago not to take an official stance on any of the terms outside of Hispanic, because Hispanic is so outdated, and we now fully recognize the limitations and the origins of that word, which comes from a scholarly Eurocentric Spanish, that really categorizes all of us from that white origin, as opposed to our more recent origins of Latin American countries, which is where most of us are from, or at least the recent generations. Not all of them, of course, because there's the Mexicans who were in the United States prior to the United States being the United States, right? So, the native communities, et cetera. But that being said, it's the way that we approach it is this. We look at it like pronouns, right? We kind of use them as synonyms. We will sometimes use Latinx, we'll sometimes use Latino, we'll sometimes use Latina. On occasion, if Latina makes sense, we will use Latina. It really depends on the context of what it is that we're writing about, who it is that we're writing about, and where appropriate and where we can make that extra effort, which we try to do as content creators every single time, is try to determine what does the person or the subject of our story identify as. And we've had people say, I actually don't identify. In fact, our senior editorial strategist, she does not identify as Latina. She identifies as Indigenous. So, she doesn't even, so we never refer to her as Latina. She's Indigenous. That's what that's how she identifies. And so, I think that's another problem, right? Is that media, because oftentimes when we do have these conversations, we are always trying to lump everybody into that big old box. And frankly, when people do push back on Latinx, we just ignore it. We just ignore it because it's not a conversation that we want to argue about. It really is about, how do you identify? That's what's important here. And if you don't identify as Latinx, then that isn't something that speaks to you. However, you will find content within our site and within our social media publications where, you know, you will find the content that speaks to you. And that's really what we, at the end of the day, try to focus on the most, is how can we best represent so many different people within this diaspora with so many different unique things, that the best thing that we can do is try to just be very specific about who it is that we're talking about. So when we do refer to people from Mexico, we will call them Mexicans. If we're referring to, Afro-Latinas from a Caribbean background, we will try to name it what it is, right? And so, the point is that I think that should be something that all media do, but even as people, we should try to make that extra effort. If we're going to try to understand you from how you identify down to your gender, then we should also try to identify you based on how you identify as a person of color.
Yes, especially because of the complexity of people. People will label themselves as Mexicans, Salvadorans, Hondurans, Colombians, whatever. It's not for us to say you're this tag. We are here to listen the story of everyone else. We're here to amplify those stories. Right. So if someone says, okay, so I don't want you to refer to me as Latinx, I want you to call me Mexican, I want you to call me Indigenous, I want you to call me Afro-Colombian or whatever, we will listen and we will make sure that people know they're identify it that way. Because we cannot say this tag is for you, because if people don't identify with it, we are not we're not governors of the culture to say, hey, this has to be your tag.
Right. Yeah, 1000%. And yeah, I definitely want to reiterate that. I think it's so important that and that was really the stance that ultimately we ended up taking, is that we are not the ones who are going to define for you. We are not going to be the ones that try to define language, particularly when it's something that's based on Spanish, which again is a language that was imposed on us. Because if we were all speaking our native tongues, we would not be speaking Spanish, right? So, there's that additional conversation of like, oh, well, Spanish is our mother tongue, or, our native. No, it's not. Right? Like, Spanish is absolutely not your native tongue, let me tell you. Unless you are from Spain, that is not your native tongue. So, you get into this conversation where people just get so passionate that you're now bastardizing the Spanish language. And, to me, I really think of language as evolving. We don't speak the English and the Spanish that we speak now. We did not speak 50 years ago. We did not speak 100 years ago. We certainly didn't speak 500 and 1,000 years ago, right? And so I'm part of those people that believe that language can evolve. And yes, Spanish is a gendered language. However, if we're speaking Spanish within the confines of a different country, I think it's absolutely acceptable to introduce new words, and to further expand that language in a way that makes sense for that particular community.
Yeah, and making sure you know what you're talking about is really hard when you have a past of erasure, people, all genocides and whatnot. How are you supposed to impose these views upon someone when we don't have our history? We don't know our history. People that have migrated don't know what happened to some of their families. Even in your own country, you don't even know, because all governments are usually really racist. So they wiped out all our people. So getting close to what exactly we are will be a constant struggle, and it's something that we'll have to live with and try to make peace with it, and make sure everyone is trying to listen to us and know that you have the right to take up space, to make your voice heard, because we're not just a dot, you know, we all have different bloods in ourselves. So it's hard to grasp those concepts.
Yes.
And I actually want to mention that because I don't think we mentioned this, but Natalia is actually in El Salvador.
Yeah.
So her perspective is a little different from ours because there has been full-on erasure of all African, Black, any of that, right, Indigenous, the historical fact of the way in which the people evolved there has been completely officially erased.
Yeah.
You know, here we're erased in many different ways and oftentimes unofficially, but the history of slavery and migration of Africans is completely absent. They don't acknowledge it.
Yeah, people pretend, yes, by the way, I saw someone asking if I'm from El Salvador. Yes, I live here in El Salvador. So, yeah. Yeah, people don't even recognize that there's Afro blood in ourselves. Most of the time, when you look different, when you have Afro hair, Afro features.
Complexion.
Yeah, complexion. Most of the time they're like, are you from outside? Did you come from whatever, Cuba or something? And I'm like, no, I was born here. I have thousands of family that have lived here, and I am here. I exist. Most of the time you feel lost because when you're young and you see people around you, they're like, yeah, they are kind of like brownish skin, but they have straight hair and their features more like indigenous or white passing. And you're out there looking extremely different than everyone else. You're like, what's going on? People don't teach you that. Not even in the best schools teach about Afro blood. They just acknowledge that we've murdered our indigenous people, but they don't even recognize that there were Black people that existed. Excuse me. There were Black people that existed that were enslaved, that suffered just as much as indigenous people. And finding records on that has been tough. There's just a couple of investigations that have started up these past few years. And it's hard because you have to find whatever information you can and make sense of your identity on your own. You don't have anyone guiding you through finding your identity. I mentioned when we first talked with Lucy and Ariel that most of my family is dead, so I don't have anyone to reach out and say, hey, do you know if we have some Afro blood in me? I have to rely on investigations, my complexion. And it's hard because you feel out of place in the place you're supposed to feel welcome. People will look down on you. People will tell you you have to better the race. You have to marry someone white to, you know, lighten your son's skin, lighten your daughter's skin. So people don't even know racism exists here. They think it's only an American thing. It's like, yeah, those things like killings and discrimination only happen there, but you're living through it. You know you are looked down upon. You know you look different. You know people will always look at you different. And finding your community here, it's hard when you look different because not everyone looks different like you. Because yeah, our Latino race looks different from all over the place, you know, like straight hair or blonde hair, but there's so few people that look like you, like curly hair and like big noses and big eyes. You're just standing there trying to find what to do. And I'm privileged enough to speak English because that's how I found out my own identity. That's how I found information that made sense to me. There's people out there that they don't even know what happened to them. What are they? And some people can live through it, some people can't. So it's complex and it's sad and it's harsh.
I just want to say thank you, Natalia, for sharing that with us. And I remember that when I originally spoke with Lucy and Natalia, that she had mentioned that, and you know, it was so hard to hear because, you know, I felt that pain, but in a different way because I related to it. And I just do also I see this comment in the chat talking about being Indigenous, and Aviona shared this with us, and I just want to shout out her and or them and just say thank you so much for sharing that story. But we're talking about colorism, we're talking about erasure, and it's like, this is exactly why I personally need a space to talk about this, because I grew up with my grandma saying we were Aztec, and then she passed in November. And then I tried to bring it up to my dad, and he said that we were white and European in Spanish, and that was it. And I'm like, no, grandma said we were Aztec, where is that? And it's that I can't even get through that wall of colorism that's so ingrained to even talk about the fact that we have a different identity other than just being Mexican. Like, where do we come from? Where are we? It's not a conversation that exists in my family. It's not one that we want to have for some reason. And as I'm trying to explore more, it's like, well, okay, I'm going to have to do a spit test then. No one's giving me no one's giving me anything to talk about. And that's why these conversations are important. And so to that, I just want to also thank everyone for sharing in the chat all of their stories and their experiences with this. But I wanted to touch quickly on sort of erasure and how that even pertains to family discussions, because I have started to try to have these discussions with my family, and for some reason, no one wants to even admit that we're anything other than possibly European, which my dad is way too dark to just be considering himself a European Latino. So there's no way. And it's like, grandma said we were different. So I'll hand it over to our speakers about talking within our family, even about where we come from. And thank you everyone so much for dropping into the chat your experiences. We really do appreciate them.
You know, for me personally, I can tell you that, you know, it takes a little bit of courage. It takes like working up to it, you know, because we grow up hearing racial epithets. We grow up hearing bad things said about looking dark or having curly hair or making the blood better by mixing with other white people, things like that, right? Like, it's commonplace when you're growing up. And, you know, when I graduated from college and started law school and really felt like I was starting to understand what was happening, because again, you know, you don't really start to realize these things until you begin to actually learn about it, you know, and oftentimes it's from external sources. It's definitely not from your family. You know, I remember my dad also passed in October, and you know, he was very Mexican, you know, and definitely had racist ideas and beliefs. And I say that, you know, I'm not proud of that. My dad was an amazing human, and but we have to acknowledge that people are not perfect and that they have their faults, you know, like, I think that's a really important step. And I remember, you know, when Obama was running, he would refer to him as el negrito. And I was like, and that's not necessarily like, he kind of said it, you know, like with con cariño, you know. But I was like, I would tell him, I would say, pa, tiene un nombre, no se llama el negrito, you know. And he would literally just like, he would refer to him, you know, just like he didn't have a name, el negrito. And I'm like, and then finally I just like said, pa, si no le vas a decir su nombre, if you're not going to say his name, just don't say it, because I don't want to hear you say that anymore, you know. And I just had to get like really firm with him and just kind of put my foot down and say, if you're not going to stop referring to him in that way, then we just can't talk about it anymore, you know. And that was really hard, because you don't want to fight with your family, and two, you certainly don't want to like call something out so bad about someone that you love so much, you know. But that's my personal story about just one of the ways in which I dealt with it. But we've heard so many different stories, and we try to highlight this tension and this dynamic within not just our families, but also our community in many of the thought pieces, the editorials, the news coverage that we produce at Loose Collective. In fact, Natalia just published one of her first personal essays at Loose Collective. I highly suggest you go to the site and check it out. And it's about her personal discovery and journey into finding and recognizing her Afro roots. But, you know, I really do think that change and the way in which we change this conversation for all of us is going to be with those one-on-one conversations. And it is going to be generation to generation to generation, right? Like my nieces and nephews are not repeating what my dad used to say, right? And so it's like, and so on and so forth. So I think that ultimately, if we are going to change any of this, it does start with each and every single one of us, and it does start at home, and it does start with difficult conversations.
Yeah, for sure. In my case, you know, our parents are usually really racist because of the background they grew up in and just the country. So I remember a lot that my mom, when I was little, used to say, like, I wish you were lighter, and oh, my poor thing, because, you know, they fear for their sons and daughters because they will be treated differently. And I remember all my family has always said to me, you should straighten your hair, you need to get a perm, the basics. And when you're young, that's rough to hear because you're just existing. You don't know why you're like that. So I've never confronted them. I just started owning up my own skin, my own hair. And my mom slowly started to realize that I was loving myself, and my sister gladly had the luck of me existing, so she wasn't alone. And she has been slowly like, these are my daughters, they are proud of who they are. So we never had that conversation, but it's just something that they have to see, that they see you are owning up on who you are. I still get comments on some of my relatives to be like, you look messy, you should straighten your hair, like you're so, you know, whatever. But now you're just like, this is who I am. I'm like, no, why should I change myself? So it's hard to do with your family because they never know what it means, because we don't talk about racism here. They don't think it's racism to be called negrito or whatever. Like one of my nicknames was negra, like whatever. It's usually not a big deal here because you're used to it. You think it's okay, and then you grow up and you're like, this comes from colonialism. This comes from these Eurocentric views, and you just have to battle yourself with it. And there's nicknames that stay, and you know you won't be offended, but you have to recognize where they come from. Yeah. And of course, finding your people and finding friends who can help you through it makes it way easier, because of course, when I was growing up, I felt lonely. I felt like I was the only one going through it. And then slowly, like people who knew that I was just different and it didn't mean anything bad, made me, you know, lift me up and help me become the person who I am. And now are like, you look great, you're amazing, and you're not bad to look that way. It's just, I think sometimes you won't have a conversation, sadly, but they will see what you're doing. And as long as you are proud of yourself, and as long as you're fighting, and as long as you have support of friends who push you to become your true self, to own up to your identity, people around you will start noticing that you have to make a change, that people have to change, that this is not just some funny thing. It's hard, and it hurts people. So yeah, that's my own experience.
Your comments remind me of the saying, your existence is resistance.
Yeah, literally.
And it's like totally embodied that, you know, like just by virtue of you being you, that was the message that you were sending loud and clear.
Yeah. yeah, I think it takes great strength to know who you are, especially when you're young, because of course you're surrounded by all things tackling against you, but you cry, you fight, but when people start listening to you, when people start hearing what you experience, they shut up and say, wait a minute, maybe life's not as easy as I thought. Maybe my country isn't as not racist as I thought, you know. So yeah, it's hard, but someone has to do it. We can allow, because I remember when I started this journey, I was like, I was alone. I felt alone, but people slowly started coming to me and be like, hey, I've lived through the same stuff you're talking. I want to know how I can do better, how I can feel better with myself. It is refreshing how you see everyone coming up together and trying to make a change and trying to feel as comfortable as they can in their own skin. So it's beautiful and it's hard at the same time. I'm reading through the comments, so.
The comments are amazing, and yes, Natalia is amazing. Those are the comments, and you are amazing. And it's crazy because, and I do just want to, I know you touched on this as well, but being in a different country, you know, I know that these conversations aren't even had as frequently or even at all. So I guess my question to you, and also to Lucy, who, you know, you work outside of the US as well with other people who are outside of the US, like, what does that look like? Was there an initial shock to this conversation of race, which is so much deeper here in the United States than anywhere else? And how has that transition been? And even how has that helped you, or maybe been more difficult for you in terms of navigating identity?
I first came across the talk of race when I think, thankfully, my school really challenges us to think differently and to write pieces and whatnot. So I remember I was asked, we were put on an assignment that was about talking about yourself. And I was just working through my hair thing. And I started talking about what meant my hair, what the history behind my hair. So that was the first step, talking in race in my school, and people started noticing that hair was a big thing and it meant a whole different thing for me. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, I have hair, it's heritage, it's blood, it's history. And then I went to college and I started talking to people, and I met other people who looked like me, and they started telling me stories about how they were profiled for the police, for work, you know, like you have to straighten your hair or you will not get the job. So it was shocking because I've experienced racism, but like light racism, you know, the comments that I mentioned earlier, I never was shut off doors or was racially profiled, mostly because I don't go out that much alone. But when I hear people that actually were living things that I thought didn't happen here, I gotta hit that I was shocked because I was desperate to people to hear me like, hey, this is not a normal thing. People are actually suffering beyond your self-esteem. People are being denied jobs. People are being detained by police. I had the opportunity to interview another Black man, the Afro-Latino, and he mentioned how the bank didn't want them to give a loan. Yeah, they did want to loan them money. And I was shocked. Now there's organizations that are working towards. There are people that are working towards racial discussions. We'll finally have a day for talking about Afro-Latinos, well, Afro-Salvadoreños. It was the past August, actually. And people don't people are shocked at first to hear that racism exists here. And depending on the bubble of the social bubble you're in, people will listen to you, or people will feel like you're imagining stuff, or they don't actually suffer, or they won't think it's as complex as it is. They will just like, but you look fine, you look pretty, and they will leave it at that, you know. But yeah, it's hard because we're still fighting to have these conversations. The people that are listening are the people that already know it's happening, or the people that in general they know about rights in general, like LGBTQ rights and women rights. We're still trying to be heard by our own government. We're still trying to push back our narrative, to make us heard, and it's been tough. At least we're being listened to, but we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, I think that's generally our experience when we publish and when we work with and we cover various social justice related movements that are occurring in other Latin American countries, whether it's anti-femicides, whether it's LGBTQ related, et cetera. First and foremost, we oftentimes do try to figure out how to get out of the choir, right? Our main audience is Gen Zers, millennials, older millennials, and young Gen Xers. So up until like mid 40s. And so generally speaking, we try to not only publish in a way that that really promotes conversation and get people to actually think about what they're reading and seeing and engaging with, but that people will hopefully share so that we get beyond that choir, right? We don't want to be preaching to the choir. What I do find, though, is the next level beyond that is that we have found that most people are on board in terms of recognizing that anti-Blackness is the foundation of all of the rest of the discrimination that occurs. That the very, very foundation of all of it is being anti-Black, and the prevalence of that within the entire Latino diaspora. But I think the next level beyond that is that people then, it's really hard for them to admit that they have benefited from that anti-Blackness, that they actually have white privilege, that they that even if they recognize that white privilege and actively work against it, that they still and continue to benefit from that white privilege without even though you're trying to do something about it, right? Like, you know, people they immediately are very sensitive about the fact that that, you know, in just by virtue of not doing certain things, that you are perpetuating the problem, right? And so I think that that's really where I try to find our sweet spot as far as a lot of the stories and the perspectives that we try to ensure are being, you know, integrated into a lot of our content, is that we recognize, and yes, someone just talked about how intersectionality is important, but it is that, right? Is that recognizing that it's okay. It's okay that we as individuals have perpetuated some of this. It's not okay if once we find out, we don't change it, right? Like, you know, so much of this is not our fault, right? Like, we're not asking people to feel guilty about whatever privilege they've had, or, you know, whatever racist things that they've said in the past, et cetera. We want you to acknowledge it. We want you to recognize it, and then we want you to change it. Right. So I think like that once we start to move that conversation forward and people are called in versus being called out, you know, because that's another thing that we try to really emphasize is like, let's have this conversation. Don't just like jump on each other and start attacking everybody. And like, we're not going to get anywhere that way. Right. Let's call people in, give them an opportunity to change, to fix their language, to even like acknowledge it, right? Like it's you know, this whole concept of people like fully acknowledging their white privilege is hard. They've lived their entire life as a person of color, and then all of a sudden they're like, wait, what? I'm a part of the problem? And you're like, yes, you are, you know, but that's okay. We can change it. So, you know, I think that's more, you know, from our perspective in terms of how we, you know, how we try to approach it, but also just what I tend to notice as far as when those conversations actually do start to occur.
Absolutely. And I think also we've seen some of that here at the mixed space too, because we talk to individuals who are mostly mixed. And so there's a lot of that, right? And I've even heard it in some of my family members, and in my, you know, on my Polish side, it's like, no, I married someone of color. I'm not racist. Or like, I'm not racist. I'm a third this, or I'm a quarter that. And it's like, well, I'm not saying that you're not a quarter this or not a quarter that, but like if you were to dig deep and like look into that 25%, you'll realize that your ancestors are really hurting here. And then like, if you're going to claim that, then let's help our people. And I think that sort of goes back to this whole conversation. And Lucy, I'm so glad you brought it up, right? Because I see this a lot working at the mixed space, where we talk about privilege a lot. You know, it was hard for me to first view myself as not white, because I grew up in PWIs and with a Polish mother and everyone anyway. And then B, after claiming that, recognize that I have so much privilege that now like, okay, I just claimed this, but like I'm a huge part of the problem, because people in spaces let stuff slide in front of me because of either the way in which I speak, the way that I present, you know, what parent I walk in with. It will even go down to what parent I walk in with. If I'm walking with my mom, with my stepmom who was born and raised in Guanajuato, there's a very different atmosphere than if I'm walking in with my Polish mom who, you know, was born here. And anyway, but I love that you mentioned that, because I feel like that really just brings us to this sort of final point that I wanted to talk about, which is really making sure that we are connecting to our ancestors. Because I feel like for me, that's been the biggest way to start this conversation with my family even too, which is like, okay, here's the thing, like, let's go back and figure out where we come from. Because now that we can understand where our people have come from, what they've gone through, then we can have more sympathy for the other people that we experience like today that are going through sort of the same things that our family has gone through years and years and years ago, you know? And so I think that conversation of reconnecting and honoring ancestry is really what I have found to be the only thing that has built solidarity when I have these conversations with my family and with other people who are of color. And even with people who are white, because it's like, okay, you're white, but are you Irish? Are you Polish? Are you German? Like you're more than just white, even especially in America. Like you came from somewhere. So if we go back to where we all originally came from, I feel like that has been the way in which to build solidarity. I'm going on a tangent, but I'm wondering, Natalia or Lucy, if you have felt that ancestry has been the connecting point for you, or if there's anything else that has really been sort of a way to begin these conversations while also not putting ourselves at risk of dealing with people who just don't want to change their minds or their viewpoints.
We've definitely seen that. I see that a lot amongst our audience. In fact, we launched a campaign last year called Unapologetic and Unapologetically Latina. And the crux of this campaign is exactly that. It's very simple. We are completely unapologetic in who we are. And who you are is defined the way that you want to define it. And it really was born of this shame. The shame that Natalia has talked about for the way that she looks, the shame for the other languages that we know how to speak, the shame in really all of these things that we've talked about throughout this entire conversation. and how recently it's been really refreshing. And certainly me, as the first Latina elected in Nevada, you can imagine it was like it was me and 3 of my colleagues. We were the first Latina. So luckily there was 4 of us. There was strength in numbers. But you can imagine, right? For so many of us, we have that experience of being the first and really feeling that pressure to assimilate and to not stand out and to not make noise and to not be who you are, frankly. And of course, that's just not my personality, period. But I also noticed that in these last, I don't know, I'd say maybe decade or so, especially for Latinos, Latinas, the Latinx community, everyone has just begun to really come into their own, and really push back against the xenophobia and the racism and this forced assimilation and this idea that you have to speak English, and that you should be ashamed if you're speaking Spanish in public, or that you were, and in previous generations, our parents oftentimes did not teach us Spanish. Mine did, because they were protecting us, right? They didn't want us to be discriminated against. They didn't want us to not get jobs, et cetera. So I understand that, but at the same time, they were stripping us of our culture, of our identities, of being proud of those roots. And so I think that what I've seen now, and what we've been so incredibly proud to promote, is people really standing in their truth, standing in their history, and standing in their identity as they define it, and as it continues to get defined, right? As they continue to figure out who they are and where they're from and what the history is, and learning that history, even because our entire history has been so erased, especially in America. That it's just really been really, really refreshing, but also, very exciting, because I think that the next generation after us is going to be even more, unapologetic about who they are.
Yeah, and connecting with your ancestors and your roots definitely puts you on a different spot, because you feel responsible of carrying out those traditions, of carrying out that culture, and it pushes you to make you prepare to speak to people, like, this is what I've been through, this is what my family has been through, this is what my ancestors have been through. I cannot give up and just completely ignore that I have that kind of past, because now I am responsible too of carrying out and doing what you can for that, like those traditions were passed down on me, whatever, and making sure that we stay true to ourselves and we share what we've learned. And it's not an easy job, but we have to do it. We have to do it unapologetically, and we have to be proud of all the things that we've learned and of all the things that have been passed on. And finding your connection with your history helps you to comprehend and to understand better what makes you, what makes you proud of being yourself. And of course, language will be lost, but our looks, our traditions, they will change and they will evolve, but knowing that they existed and not ignoring is the important part, because of course we're changing, the future is ahead of us, but knowing our history, knowing what passed, it's important to know that made us that made us stronger, that now we're greater than every other one, and it's okay to not be as 100% whatever Mexican or Peruvian or Colombian, just knowing that you have cool history behind you, cool history in you, that's enough, I think.
Yeah, and I definitely want to underscore the conversation about being shamed for not speaking Spanish. You know, that's certainly something that we see all the time. Also, conversations we often have, and it's not right. It's you know, it's like these expectations. I oftentimes very much identify with the line. I don't even know if it was actually ever said, but the line by Selena's dad in the movie Selena. You know, like, not Mexican enough for the Mexicans, not white enough for the Americans, you know, you're just kind of like in this limbo. But that's exactly what our unapologetic campaign is about, is that we just don't give a shit about any of that. Done, punto, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't care if you don't think I'm Mexican enough, and I don't care if you don't think I'm American enough.
Yeah.
I'm Lucy, I'm gonna be me, done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, if we can all just move forward in that way, you know, there's no shame in any of it. Like, no shame in speaking pocho Spanish, perfect Spanish, no Spanish, Spanglish Spanish, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah. Like, who are you to tell me I'm not good enough
Right.
for
Like,
people?
I'm about to make up my own words.
Yeah,
I'm gonna start speaking Pig Latin, and you're really not gonna understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I think also too, you know, it's so crazy because as someone who's mixed with Polish and Mexican, like that was a huge thing that I had to come into too, because you have family members. And what's crazy is that the experiences that I've had as a mixed person biracially are matching other Latinos and Latinas experiences as well, because there's so much intersectionality just in this diaspora, right? And so I think a lot of my experience, and we have this actually in our booklet, but Maria P. Root has an amazing resource for mixed people and also people who are multi-ethnic, multiracial. And one of her Bill of Rights says that you can change your identity also as it evolves. And that has really helped me, because I went from being white to being mixed to being Latina, and maybe it'll be mestizaje in the future. We don't know. I mean, and that's what's really amazing too, is it's like, as you continue to unravel the layers of your identity and get reconnected with ancestry and even learn language if you so choose to, it's like you can make the decision of who you want to be. And if you wake up tomorrow and it's different, there is no one else that can say that that's not who you are, because you have your own agency to make the decision of your identity, even if it changes by the hour, by the day, by the week, by the month. It's really up to you. And that has been such an amazing thing for me. And also a resource that I do just want to shout out to people. We do have that in our booklet too. But it's hard. It is really hard. And I'm just so grateful that we get to talk about it, and that we get to have a space where we can all be present together and just like relate, right? Because that's the craziness about it, is that we all come from different backgrounds, but there is this undercurrent of erasure, colorism, and like intersectionality that probably all of us and our families, our older generations, have dealt with in such a strong way, that now we can come together in a space and say, like, I feel you, I feel that pain, I feel you carrying their pain. Like, where do we go moving forward from here? So thank you everyone for being here. We're gonna do a really cool thing right now where we put a bunch of people into breakout rooms. These are not recorded, so you can all reflect and just like even say, oh my goodness, I related, or I didn't relate, or this was crazy, or when she said that, I felt it, or when, you know, they brought up this, that reminded me of my experience. But before we do that, everyone who's here, if you would be willing, we would love to take a group photo of everyone. So if you feel called to take yourself off camera, just to have a group photo of us would be amazing. So everyone who wants to take themselves off camera, go for it right now. And we will take our group photo, and then we will all go to breakout rooms and reflect more and share more and feel more. So I see everyone taking themselves off camera. This is amazing. And thank you everyone who is still with us. And we will take this in, I'll count us down. I'll do like a 3, 2, 1, and everyone just strike a pose. And okay, ready? Here we go. We all look beautiful. 3, 2, 1. Great, perfect, awesome. So now we're going to put everyone into breakout rooms, and we will come back after that and do a little bit of a whiteboard session, and then we will close up. So in a few short seconds, you will be invited to a breakout room. You can click join breakout room to go into one of those. And as I mentioned, these are not going to be recorded, so feel free to share openly with how you're feeling, check in, all that good stuff.
I would like to say really fast, if anyone is called to submit a personal essay, we do compensate our writers. You can email info@loosecollective.com. There's also a submission link on the website. We publish voices all the time, personal essays, whatever perspectives you have. It goes through an editorial board. So, I'm not the one that's like, yes or no, whatever, the editorial board decides. But if you do have a story to tell and you want to pitch it, I certainly encourage everybody to do so.
And the name is the Lose Collective, because we have where to submit.
Yeah, it's loosecollective.com, and there's a link somewhere right for us, or it's either at the bottom and the top, but it's very apparent on the website.
Thank you. And you should have just gotten your breakout room questions, so you can go ahead and join that, and then we will all come back. Welcome back, everyone, to this fun little thing. This is a whiteboard. So what's really cool about this is that you can actually write onto this. So what we're going to do now is whatever you want to share from your breakout room, if you heard anything that you resonated with, you can shout it out or drop it in the chat, or just actually click on the whiteboard function, and I'll tell you how to do that in a second. So how do you do whiteboard? Let's figure it out together. I usually have a write-up about this, but now it's not there. So if you go to the top of your screen, you can click view options, and you can annotate. I don't know if people can see that. There we go. Ta-da! Or you could just write into the chat anything that you heard, anything that you resonated with. And look at this. You guys are figuring it out. Cool. Anything in the chat that you heard, that you resonated with, and we will put it in here. Or feel free to take yourself off mute. This is kind of like the chill part of the meetup. We're all here. We're all just talking about things that we've heard, things that we've experienced. I will say, resonated with it so much, and I loved it. We talked in my group about just the living in the middle in a gray area, and not being enough for one part of our identities and not being enough for another, and living in that middle. So I'm just going to drop into the chat like that, the gray area of identity. And I'll just leave some silence in the space for anyone to take themselves off mute and share.
I wrote it on the whiteboard, but generations of fear came out of a conversation we spoke about how the previous generations have been actively pushing away from Indigenous and Black cultures and acceptance simply because of the genocides that have happened to those people. And so we've been moving out of fear rather than moving out of connectivity and acceptance and empowerment. And so that fear has constantly pushed us away from one another. But we as the next generation can join forces by eradicating that fear from ourselves.
We also talked about language and how with the heritage, and personally I identify as Latina and Indigenous, so we kind of got on the topic of how do you, when speaking Spanish, and what do you feel comfortable with? And one of them was I feel comfortable speaking Spanish more sometimes with other people who want to speak Spanish, and then there's sometimes they get offended with English, and trying to find a happy medium. Spanish is not my first language, but I've taken multiple years of courses of Spanish. But then we got into Indigenous languages and trying to reconnect. So I found specific free, Stanford does a free thing on Quechua. So I've tried to go to those classes. And then there was an artist called Renata Flores who did a remake of Michael Jackson's song in Quechua, which I thought was beautiful. And she's trying to embrace that side of her culture and sharing it with the world. So I thought it was pretty interesting because language, I think, is something that truly does bring people together in different ways, if it's just the sound of it or how you hear it in musicals or music. So I thought that was a really good conversation.
we were talking in my group about how growing up, not being taught a language has a really big impact on you too. That's been my personal experience, and just the reasoning behind that, right? So like in my group, we talked about how sometimes like what I can only speak from the I. So speaking from the I, like what my family went through sort of wanted them or made them want to restrict that from me for fear that I would possibly endure the same pain that they went through. It's like that was an interesting conversation, and also thing that many people resonated with, just that fear of, you know, having their children be just like hurt because they speak Spanish or have an accent, like played into a part of restricting culture, which I feel like for me at least was almost equally as painful, because now it's like I walk through the world looking a certain way and having people not accept that I'm, you know, I don't speak Spanish, like, and it can get a little crazy.
Ariel, you talking had me think about also language that I forgot to say. But for me, because I'm a dark-skinned Latina, I had to, my family would tell me that I had to speak Spanish so that other people knew I was Puerto Rican. If not, then they would think I'm Black, and then I'll just get discriminated against. So there's like that other side of it.
Wow. This is Lucy. That's absolutely fascinating. That's actually one of the first times I've heard that perspective. Thank you for sharing that, Jalissa.
You're welcome.
That is crazy. Also, something that I heard in our group was, Jalissa, maybe actually you could, if you feel comfortable sharing it, just the struggling with the term Afro-Latina and how we don't call lighter skinned Latinas Euro-Latinas.
Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking of recently, because I would consider myself Latina, because that's how I grew up. You know, we're all mixed. You know, there's the Taino Indian, Spaniard, African. That's how my family understands it. So, but then hearing the term Afro-Latina, I'm like, okay, like I'm Afro-Latina only because of my hair and the color of my skin. So does that make, the question in my head then was, does that make light-skinned Latinas like Euro-Latinas or like Spaniard Latinas? Like I got a little confused. So I'm like, am I less Latina because I'm Afro as well? So it's just like, you know, again, like, how do I identify? Like, yeah, Afro-Latina, but at the same time, ultimately, like my spirit, like I'm Latina.
That's actually really curious, Jalissa, because at first I didn't want to identify myself as an Afro-Latina, because I thought the same thing, like, am I just an Afro-Latina because of my hair, my skin color? And then I had some discussions with other Afro-Latinas, and they're like, if you want to be comfortable and you want to own up with the past and the history, then go ahead. Like the only one who's like stopping you from identifying yourself as whatever you want to, it's how you perceive the thing, you know, like you're not forced to tag yourself like that, but you're also like welcome to do it. So yeah, it's really difficult, especially because you said so, like you feel Latina, so for you are Latina, and of course you live differently, whatever you live, your race, and I live differently in my race here, so it's all very complex.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny, Jalissa and I were in group together as well, and I'm also Puerto Rican, but I you know, identify and I just am, you know, I'm multiracial, so I could kind of pass between each of the races if I, you know, depending on who's looking at me and what group I'm in. And you know, and for me, and I think everybody's experience, like Natalia was saying, is really individual as to who they are, because my experience as a multiracial Latina is going to be very different
from what, Julissa experiences, right? So, being, I guess like more Afro appearing, just maybe she's a little darker than me, but doesn't make me have any less Afro features, right? So but it depends on who's looking at us and how they're perceived and how we were raised. And in my family, like my mother was more mestiza, and my father was like mulatto, right? So you have like very different experiences, and even where they grew up, even culturally, they're different, right? Because they were more mestizo. They grew up in the mountains. On my mother's side, there was like more like, they didn't really have as many drums in their music. Everything was like guitar and flutes. And here in the, my Afro-Latino, my Afro family grew up in like the Santurce area of the city. Obviously they were more, connected to the Afro roots, right? So the dancing looks different, everything looks different, right? So it's really, but I'm a fusion of them all, right? So, like I know them, I could walk through all of these different worlds and I see them, but again, my family from the mountains is not going to understand my family from San Juan, right? Like they have a different experience and they look at life. Not that they all identify as Puerto Rican, but they all, have a different experience. And they, one can't deny that they're African, and the others can just say, we are just, we're Spaniards, or, but your grandmother was an Indian, right? Like, those are the kind of the language that would come through, like, so we would know where our roots came from. There are like those little stories in the history, but they are slightly different depending on where they were and who was mixed with what, right? So I think that is interesting for me, just in my experience.
Thank you, Catherine. I did see someone's hands up. Aviona, I think that was you. If you wanted to share with us, feel free to. If not, that's totally okay. But I did just want to say that I saw someone's hand up.
No, thank you. It was all beautifully said.
Okay, awesome. Yes, and Catherine and I were talking about that in our room too, how that intersectionality of like walking through life and like being able to pass in different spaces also like has made it a little bit difficult as well, because it's like, how do you, just for me in terms of being mixed, like it's been like I'm 50 this, 50 that, but then doing this research and working with this in race and identity studies, it's been, I read somewhere that it's not half, it's not 50% this, it's not 50% that, it's 100% one thing and 100% another, but you're just sort of coexisting in the same body. And that has been really helpful for me, because it's like, it helped me just framing it differently in my head, because I feel like I even myself, I was invalidating my experiences in one culture versus another. But to say, okay, I'm 100% this and 100% that, but I'm just, all of that is living in one body. It was amazing.
Ariel, we had actually, we launched a campaign at my previous digital media company where I was the vice president of public affairs at Meetup. And it was the 200%. And the idea was we are all living in the hyphen. And it was that. It was, we're not 50 that, we're not 25 that, we are 100%. We're the sum of all the parts, right? And it was that concept. And so it's like, we're 100% American, 100% Mexican, 100% whatever, but we called it the 200%. So it was a really successful campaign. And
maybe it was like your really, campaign.
It might've been, but yeah, it was that concept that we don't have to choose. We're beyond that. We don't have to choose. We can be whatever the hell we want, when we want to be it, anytime, right? Yes. And we can be as much or as little of it as we want to be.
Jay, I saw your hand up. Did you want to add to that?
My mind is just blown right now with listening to Julissa talking and you, Ariel. I've always said I'm half Dominican, half Venezuelan. And I've had to juggle these two cultures that are so different. And I've always just gone back and forth, like, I think battling with myself. Like when I go to Venezuela, like I may speak like them. My accent may be more Venezuelan because I grew up with my Venezuelan family, but like I look very Dominican, so I didn't fit in. And then when I go to Dominican Republic, they'll be like, oh, you don't sound like us, but you look like us. And then living here in the US, so like I always like, yeah, like I'm half this, half that. And just hearing that, like, no, like I'm just 100% me. I'm 100% who I am. Because even like when we look at Dominicans, when we look at Venezuelans, like there's so much blended culture within that culture. So I don't know. I just wanted to say like I'm getting the chills right now listening to you guys. And I didn't know that jumping on this was gonna change my mentality and blow my mind so much. But just being someone who has always struggled with that, this means a lot. So.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, Jay
That's what we're here for.
Jay Castillo Jimenez. That's what's
And
up.
while you just said that, this is reminding me to call everyone to drop your socials in the chat, just so we can do a quick little follow. We have more events that talk about mixedness and like what that means to us. We do these every month. So next month, we're actually doing an October meetup that talks about like sacred scenes, and we dive into cultural appropriation and how you shouldn't do that, as we all know, but also like respecting where things come from. So it just like sort of calls even more so to, there it is. That's our graphic. Look at that. Even more so, it just calls, right, to like demand respect for things and not culturally appropriate. If anyone here wants to go on Instagram Live with me and talk more about this exact topic, we do a 2.0 that happens at the end of the month. And literally anyone is welcome to help moderate that with me. Like, so just kind of DM us on Instagram or drop it in the chat. Like if you felt like something wasn't said here that you want to talk about, or if you just felt like, I want to share my story, do it. Contact us. Let's have that discussion. We would love that. We have an event feedback form as well. As this meetup is coming to an end, we're going to keep it open just so we can all continue to talk. You know, like if you guys want to share more things, this will just stay open, but we do have an event feedback form that we ask you to fill out if you have a moment to, just so we can have your understanding of how this event went, if you liked it, if you didn't, how we could improve on it for the future. And as I said, if you know anyone who wants to talk with us, maybe for an event like this moving forward, we have a contact at the Mixed Space email that you can send a contact to. So feel free to shoot us a contact there or DM us on Instagram. Drop your socials if you want to. And you can also put it on your Instagram story as well, just as a little interactive thing if you so choose to. But yeah, it's crazy talking about mixed identity. I will say that in the next minute, the meetup will officially like end, but everyone is welcome to stay and dive deeper into this conversation or share things, or even be like, my dad said this to me and it really hurt me. Like, this is the space to do that, because I'll back you up and I'll say like, yeah, my grandma said this to me when I gave her a sweater once and it was weird. But I just want to thank all our speakers for being here as the meetup officially comes to an end. We're not kicking anyone off. So we can be here all night. That's the situation. And usually we are, sometimes for another hour. So the meetup is officially ending at 8 Central, 9 Eastern, or what is it, 7 Pacific, or I don't know what it is in other countries. So I apologize for that, because I know people are calling in from different countries, but I do just want to say thank you, Lucy and Natalia, once again for joining us. And we can keep the conversation going, because Jay, that's crazy. And I relate to that. And let's keep it talking. Let's keep it coming.